Rain slid down the city like it was tired of staying upright. It ran along broken signs, soaked old posters, and filled cracks in the sidewalk that Elias Carter knew too well. He walked fast, head down, hands deep in his pockets. Morning was almost gone, and the bakery would soon open its back door. Elias reached the alley behind the shop and waited with 3 other workers. None of them asked questions. They all needed the same thing: cash by the end of the day. When the door opened, warm air and the smell of bread spilled out. Elias stepped inside and tied an apron around his thin frame. He worked quickly. Trays in, trays out. No talking. No mistakes. His hands were rough from soap and heat, but he didn't slow down. He liked work that didn't ask who he was. By noon, his shift ended. He was handed cash in an envelope, light as always. Enough for food, not enough for anything else. He thanked the manager and left before anyone could look too closely at him. Outside? The rain had stopped, but the air stayed heavy. Elias walked toward the river where the benches were dry under the bridge. He bought a cheap sandwich and ate slowly. He had learned to stretch time the same way he stretched food. People passed by with phones in their hands, faces lit by screens. None of them looked at him. That was fine. Being invisible was safer. Elias had once lived in a house where the floors shined and the walls held art worth more than this whole street. He remembered wide windows, tall ceilings, and quiet dinners where everyone spoke carefully. His grandfather's house. Harold Carter. The name still felt heavy. Harold was rich in the way people wrote about in magazines. Old money, clean suits, calm voice. He believed problems could be solved with planning and patience. He also believed distance fixed wounds. When Elias was 19, distance had swallowed everything. There had been arguments back then about school, about choices, about love. Elias had wanted to study music, not business. He had wanted a life that felt alive, not perfect. Harold had said some dreams were hobbies, not futures. Words had turned sharp. Pride had grown loud. Elias left at first. He told himself it was temporary. He worked odd jobs, stayed with friends. He told Harold he was fine. Harold believed him. Or maybe he chose to. Years passed faster than Elias expected. Jobs came and went. Rent rose. Friends moved on. One bad month became another. Eventually, Elias slept in his car. Then the car died. After that, the street felt closer than home ever had. Still, he called his grandfather on holidays. He kept his voice steady, said he was busy. He said things were going well. Lies were easier than hearing disappointment. That afternoon, Elias walked toward a closed cafe where the owner sometimes let him sit out back. As he turned the corner, he heard someone say his name, Elias. He froze. He turned slowly and saw Lila Monroe standing a few feet away. She wore a long coat and carried a camera bag over her shoulder. Her hair was loose, her eyes warm and surprised. "Wow," she said softly. "It really is you." Elias felt heat rush to his face. Lila was from another life. College days, late-night talks, shared coffee. She had believed in his music when no one else had. "Hey," he said, trying to sound normal. They stood there unsure what to say. Lila's eyes moved from his face to his worn jacket, then back again. She didn't ask questions. She never had been that kind of person. "I work nearby," she said. "I do photography now, street stories, real people." "That sounds like you," Elias said. They talked about small things. About the city. About how strange it felt to run into each other like this. Elias forgot, for a moment, where he was standing. He forgot to be careful. Lila smiled at him in a way that made his chest ache. "You always had this look," she said, "like you were carrying too much, but still standing." He laughed quietly. "Guess some things don't change." She hesitated, then lifted her camera. "Can I take your picture?" Elias blinked. "Why?" "'Cause," she said simply, "you're honest, and people need to see that." He shrugged. "Sure, it's just a picture." He didn't see himself the way she did. He didn't see the tired strength, the quiet dignity. He only saw what he had lost. She took the photo quickly. One click. No posing. No fixing. They talked a little more, then said goodbye. Leela walked away, glancing back once, with a soft smile. Elias watched her go until she turned the corner. He packed his bag and moved on. That evening, Lila sat in her small apartment, sorting through photos. When she reached Elias's picture, she stopped. The image felt heavy, real. She wrote a short caption about resilience and posted it online. She tagged the location. Nothing else. Within hours, the photo spread. Comments appeared. Shares followed. People felt something when they looked at it across the country. In a quiet office with polished wood and framed awards, Harold Carter scrolled through his phone. He rarely used social media. But one of his assistants had sent him a link. Thought you might want to see this. The message said. Harold frowned and tapped the screen. The image loaded slowly. When it did, his breath caught. He leaned closer. Heart pounding. The face on the screen was thinner, older, but unmistakable. The eyes were the same ones he had watched grow up, the same ones that used to look at him with trust. Elias, he whispered. He read the caption. He read the comments. He zoomed in until the pixels blurred. His hand shook. Memories rushed back. Arguments, silence, years of careful distance. He had sent money once or twice, but Elias had refused. Harold had told himself that meant independence. Strength. Now he saw the truth. Harold stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. He paced the room, anger and fear twisting together. Not at Elias. At himself. He picked up the phone and made a call, then another. His plans formed quickly. Private jets, schedules, meetings canceled. That night, Elias lay on cardboard beneath the bridge, unaware that his life had already begun to shift. Rain returned, soft but steady. He pulled his coat tighter and stared into the dark. He didn't. No, a picture had traveled farther than he ever had. He didn't know the man he had tried to leave behind was already on his way back. Harold Carter could not sleep. Not because of the usual restlessness of old age, but because the image of his grandson sitting on the wet sidewalk had taken root in his mind. He stared at the phone in his hand, the photo still open, and ran his fingers over the screen as if touching it could change the reality. The face staring back at him was younger than his age, but older than the last memory he had of Elias, a man shaped by hardships, by nights colder than he had ever known. Every line on his face told a story Harold had never asked to hear. He recalled the times they had spent together in Elias's childhood, the laughter echoing through wide hallways, the piano keys Elias had played with reverent care, the music. Lessons Harold had reluctantly supported. But that had been years ago. Life had a way of moving fast, and so had Harold, wrapped up in boardrooms, charity dinners, and quiet, careful routines that ignored the things that hurt, the things that were unseen. And now the unseen was staring him straight in the eyes. Harold made calls immediately. His assistants answered with a practiced efficiency, assuming it was just another business matter. He didn't explain, didn't give details. He demanded a car, a plane, anything necessary to reach the city where Elias had been surviving, unknown to him, for years. The assistant hesitated, sensing the unusual urgency in Harold's voice, but did as he was told. Harold didn't wait. He grabbed his coat, keys, and left the house before anyone could question the sudden change in his routine. Meanwhile, Elias had returned to his usual route, walking past closed shops and narrow streets that smelled of rain and coffee. He carried his bag over one shoulder, light and empty except for the few belongings he still trusted. Nights were long and days were tiring, but there was a rhythm in his life. He had learned to keep moving, to keep small victories close, to smile at the rare kindness offered by strangers. He didn't expect surprises. He didn't hope for anything from anyone, not even from his grandfather who had forgotten how to reach him years ago. But the city had a way of shifting suddenly. A black car rolled past him slowly as he turned a corner near the park where he sometimes rested. Elias noticed it, but instinctively ignored it. Too many people had stared before. Some asked questions he did not want to answer. Others stared, in judgment. His life had taught him that attention was often danger in disguise. Yet the car stopped ahead, its engine humming quietly. The door opened and out stepped a man in a tailored coat, familiar yet foreign in the rainy light. Harold Carter. Elias froze, hands tightening around the straps of his bag. Grandfather. His voice was cautious, incredulous. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his head, but never imagined it would arrive so suddenly, so real. Harold's eyes were full, not just with recognition, but with something deep, regret, fear, longing. Elias, he said softly, carefully, as if saying the name might shatter something delicate. The first words between them were heavy with unspoken history. Elias's anger surfaced first, not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and sharp. He had hidden from this man for years, survived on his own, avoided calls, maintained the illusion of independence. And now Harold was here, suddenly claiming concern. The anger was a shield, protecting years of pride and pain. Harold stepped closer. He began, then stopped. There were no excuses good enough for the years of absence, the missed holidays, the letters that went unanswered. I didn't know, he finally said, the words simple but loaded with truth. I never knew. Elias studied his grandfather. His coat, clean and crisp, contrasted with the wet streets and damp bag he carried. His voice, though soft, carried authority, the same presence Elias had felt in childhood. Yet behind the polished exterior, there was vulnerability, an openness Elias hadn't expected. Why now? Elias asked, keeping his tone level, but edged with years of restraint. Why are you here now, after all this time? He could feel the tension coiling in his chest, the mixture of fear, curiosity, and longing he had tried to bury. Harold had always been someone to admire, to look up to, but also someone whose judgment had hurt him more than words ever could. Harold paused, searching for the right answer. Because I saw the picture, he said finally. Eyes meeting Elias's with an intensity that made the street feel smaller, more intimate. And I realized, I've been blind. I've been blind to you, to everything you've gone through. I can't undo the past, Elias, but I need to help, if you'll let me. The words hung between them. Elias's heart thumped unevenly, a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. Offers of help had always come with strings, with conditions, with the unspoken expectation that he would conform to a life he had left behind. Accepting now meant vulnerability, trust, and possibly disappointment. Yet, in Harold's eyes, he saw a sincerity he had not anticipated. You can help me, Elias said slowly, testing the waters. But it's not that simple. It's years of independence. Don't just vanish overnight. And I can't pretend this is okay. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it. The subtle crack of someone who had carried too much alone. Harold nodded, absorbing every word. He wasn't offering a grand gesture. Not yet. He was listening. That alone was a start. For the first time he felt the weight of the distance he had kept, the years he had chosen convenience over presence. The realization cut deeper than any argument ever had. Across the street, Lila watched quietly from her perch by a lamppost. She hadn't intended to follow them, but her instincts, by years of capturing life's raw moments, had drawn her here. She observed the exchange, sensing the tension, the history, the unspoken truths flowing like invisible currents. Elias noticed her, and for a split second, he felt a strange relief. Seeing her reminded him of simpler times, of someone who had believed in him without judgment, without expectation. Harold extended a hand, a gesture simple yet profound. Elias, I can't change the past, but I can be here now. Let me start by being here. Elias hesitated. The city seemed to hold its breath. Rain had returned lightly, wetting the streets and washing the weight of the moment into the night. Accepting help was not easy. Pride, fear, and years of self-reliance formed a barrier thicker than any walls Harold could offer. Yet refusing now felt like rejecting a part of himself. He had long neglected the part that still craved family, stability, and connection. They walked together slowly, not speaking, each step a negotiation between past pain and future possibilities. Elias could feel the tension in his shoulders, a cautious curiosity in his heart, and a flicker of hope he had long suppressed. Harold kept pace, careful not to push, careful to listen, letting his presence speak louder than words. As they reached the corner where the city lights reflected off puddles, Elias finally spoke. "You can't just fix this," he said, voice soft but firm. "Years of survival, they change a person." "And I'm not the same kid you knew," Harold nodded. "I don't expect you to be. I just want to be here now, for whatever you'll allow." That night they parted with no grand declarations. Harold returned to his car, Elias back to the small bench he called home. But something had shifted. The air felt different. The city felt quieter. Both of them carried a fragile thread of connection, stretched but unbroken, a possibility of mending that neither dared to fully name. Lila, watching from a distance, smiled faintly. She understood that some stories didn't need words to be real. The first step had been taken. The second, she knew, would be harder and yet necessary. Elias and Harold were no longer islands. The stormy waters between them were being crossed, one careful step at a time. And as Elias lay down that night under the bridge, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the gentle patter of rain, he felt an unfamiliar warmth. It wasn't complete safety, wasn't forgiveness fully given or received, but it was enough to make him wonder if maybe, just maybe, the life he had fought so hard to survive could also include moments of trust, and maybe, in time, reconciliation, somewhere far away. Harold stared at the ceiling of his suite, replaying Elias's expressions over and over. The guilt, the regret, and the hope mingled in his chest like a storm and calm at once. He had missed so many years. Yet finally he understood what mattered most. Not wealth, not success, not appearances, but simply being present, being willing to face what had been avoided for far too long. The night deepened, wrapping both grandfather and grandson in quiet, separate but connected solitude. Tomorrow they would have to speak again. Tomorrow Elias would test Harold's intentions. Tomorrow they would both take steps toward a fragile understanding, toward a reconciliation neither had believed possible. And somewhere in the distance, the city carried on, indifferent yet ready to witness the slow, painful, and hopeful reunion of two lives that had drifted apart but never truly lost their link. The morning came quietly, though Elias did not feel its calm. Light leaked through the cracks of his temporary shelter, washing the damp cardboard he slept on. For the first time in months, he did not rush to hide from the world. Last night's encounter with Harold had changed something, though he wasn't sure what. Part of him wanted to run, to retreat to the familiar cold and loneliness. Another part wanted to see what Harold truly meant by being here now. Elias moved slowly through the streets, carrying his small bag and a heart heavier than he had expected. He remembered every moment from yesterday, the way Harold had stood, uncertain yet determined. The way his voice had softened when he admitted he hadn't known, the careful watchfulness in his eyes. Elias still felt the quiet anger and distrust, but beneath it was curiosity, the faintest flicker of hope he had long buried. Meanwhile, Harold had arranged a modest apartment for Elias, not in a luxurious tower, not in a flashy neighborhood, but something practical, small, and simple. He wanted Elias to feel in control, not trapped. He knew that imposing wealth would scare him, would make him feel like a charity case. Harold had never been subtle, but this time he tried. Carefully, he arranged something that said, "I care, but I respect you." Harold arrived at the city early, determined to be nearby without crowding. He watched Elias from a distance, noting the way he moved through the streets, cautious, precise, always alert. Years of life on the margins had sharpened him. Harold felt a pang of guilt for every day Elias had spent in that state, every night. He had endured cold and hunger, while Harold remained comfortably ignorant. Elias stopped at the small park where he often rested. Rain had left puddles that reflected the gray sky, a mirror to the world he had inhabited. He sat on a bench and considered what Harold had offered. Accepting help meant exposing himself, admitting vulnerability, letting someone into a life he had fought to manage alone. It was terrifying. Yet the thought of a warm bed, a safe space, and meals without constant calculation was tempting. Harold approached carefully. He did not rush Elias, did not speak before being invited. When Elias noticed him, he stiffened, ready to deflect, ready to retreat. But Harold did not demand attention. He sat on a nearby bench a few feet away, giving space yet presence. "I'm here," he said softly, almost to himself. "I want to be here if you'll let me." Elias didn't respond immediately. Words felt dangerous. He studied Harold, seeing the same careful eyes, the same posture he remembered, but softened by the weight of guilt and remorse. He realized that Harold was not just showing up because he could, or because it was convenient. He was showing up because he had to, because the distance between them had become unbearable. Days passed with small steps. Harold did not overwhelm Elias with offers of money or apartments at first. He followed him to the streets, to the corners Elias frequented, to the diners where he sometimes found food. He observed without interfering, listened without judgment, and slowly earned trust. Each day Elias allowed him closer, but on his terms. He did not speak of the nights spent under bridges or the loneliness he had carried. Instead, he allowed Harold to see him as he was during daylight, moving through the city, alive and cautious. During this time, Lila remained a quiet presence. She met Elias for coffee, shared photographs, and encouraged him without forcing intimacy. Their bond deepened, built on understanding and shared history. Lila never judged, never offered help that came with strings. She simply existed in his world, a reminder that connection could exist without obligation, that support could be gentle. Elias felt warmth he hadn't known in years, a comfort that was both grounding and fragile. Harold arranged for the apartment again, ensuring it was simple, warm, and furnished in a way that invited Elias's control. There were no lavish decorations, no excesses that screamed wealth, just space, light, and safety. Harold left the keys on the table and a note. For when you are ready, no pressure. No expectation, just a place to rest. Elias hesitated. He circled the apartment several times, observing the space. It smelled faintly of paint and wood, clean but neutral. Felt the familiar tug of pride and independence. Accepting the apartment would be a concession he had avoided for years. Yet something in him, a small, buried hope, told him it was time. He entered, closed the door, and took a deep breath. That night, Elias slept indoors for the first time. In months, the mattress was thin, the blankets basic, but it was dry, warm, and safe. He listened to the distant city hum, the occasional car passing, and felt the quiet luxury of not needing to plan for survival every moment. Sleep came slowly, but it was real, unbroken by fear. Harold waited outside the apartment initially, unsure if Elias would welcome him. Eventually, he knocked lightly. Elias opened the door, cautious but willing. Harold stepped in without fanfare, acknowledging the space, the rules Elias had set. They talked quietly, sharing small memories, laughter, and moments of understanding. No apologies were grand, no declarations made, but the connection was being rebuilt slowly, brick by careful brick. Over the next week, the rhythm of Elias's life began to change. He found part-time work at a small music store, teaching lessons and helping with inventory. Leela continued to encourage him, attending gigs and capturing moments for her photography. Harold visited often, sometimes just to sit and listen, sometimes to offer guidance when asked. Elias realized that help could exist without pressure, that trust could grow gradually, and that relationships could heal in time. There were nights of doubt. Old habits of caution resurfaced, memories of cold streets, and the instinct to retreat. But Harold never forced the issue. He understood that healing and acceptance required patience. Each night, Elias slept a little more peacefully. Each day, walked a little taller. The bond between Elias and Harold evolved into something deeper than simple family duty. Harold learned to witness Elias as a man shaped by hardship, not a child. To be rescued, Elias learned that wealth and influence did not have to be weapons, that care could exist without control. And through it all, Lila remained a gentle anchor, a reminder of the life and love that could be nurtured outside of fear and pride. Months passed. Elias began to compose music again, small pieces inspired by the streets he had survived, the people he had met, and the family he had reconnected with. He performed at local venues, often accompanied by Lila's photography exhibitions, merging his two worlds in a way that felt honest and fulfilling. Harold attended quietly, observing, never taking over, simply existing as support. One evening, Elias and Harold sat on the apartment balcony, watching the city lights reflect on puddles from an earlier rain. The air was crisp, but not cold. Elias turned to Harold, meeting his gaze. "I never thought we'd get here," he said softly. Harold nodded, eyes glistening. "Neither did I, but I'm grateful we did." Elias smiled faintly, feeling the weight of years lift slightly. The past was not erased. The pain and hardship remained, etched into memory and character. But the future was no longer a threat, okay? It was a space to be navigated carefully, with love, patience, and trust. This city moved on around them, indifferent yet intimate. The lights, the sounds, and the people formed a background to a story that was finally finding its rhythm. Elias realized that life could be rebuilt, relationships could heal, and trust could grow stronger than fear. He had survived alone, yes, but now he could choose to survive alongside people who cared, alongside people who truly saw him. In the days that followed, Elias, Harold, and Lila continued to weave their lives together carefully. They celebrated small victories, a lesson taught, a photograph captured, a meal shared. They acknowledged missteps, moments of doubt, and the lingering shadows of hardship. But the bond strengthened with each shared experience, with each act of presence and understanding. Elias found peace in knowing he was not alone. Harold found humility in witnessing the resilience of his grandson. Lila found joy in observing their gradual reconciliation, capturing the quiet beauty of their lives in her work. And for the first time in years, all three felt that life could be full of connection, of warmth, and of hope. Elise's nights were no longer haunted by fear. The streets were memories, not prisons. Harold's presence was not a demand, but a choice. And Lila's companionship was not obligation, but friendship, and perhaps something more. Together, they navigated the delicate balance of past, present, and future, understanding that healing was not linear, but steady steps forward were enough. The apartment became a home. Not because of the furniture or warmth alone, but because it was filled with care, attention, and acceptance. Each window, each corner, each soft light held the potential of a life rebuilt. Elias played his music softly in the evenings, watched Lila arrange her photographs, and saw Harold quietly reading, listening, and simply being. And in those quiet moments, Elias understood that survival was no longer about endurance alone. It was about connection, trust, and the willingness to allow others into his life without fear of judgment. He had been homeless, yes, but he was no longer alone. He had reclaimed parts of himself he thought lost forever, and with patience, care, and love. He was building a life that could sustain not just his body, but his heart and soul. The city outside continued its endless rhythm, the lights flickering in familiar patterns. But inside TH,